show started. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest installment of Inside the Doctor's Lounge, the place where we can all come together, just like in a real doctor's lounge, and have honest conversations on any range of topics. So with that, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm your host, Dr. Desmond Bell, and we're really fortunate to have an outstanding guest today in the lounge, Dr. Jerry Mansfield. Jerry actually wears several hats. He is a nurse by training, got his PhD in public health. But before we get into our discussion today, I want to introduce my colleagues, Rhonda Crow, CEO and founder of MD Coaches, Dr. Randy Cook, who hosts our podcast, RX or Prescription for Success, and Dr. Rick Zollinger, who also co-hosts a podcast of his own called Pickin' and Puttin', the whole story of songs behind golf and how they all tie in. Anyway, Jerry, it's great to have you with us today. Thank you for being here. And, you know, I'll get this thing started because, you know, looking at your background, and it's interesting. We've got the Ohio connection here today. Jerry's from, he's right now in Columbus, Ohio at the Mount Carmel Health System. And Rhonda's an Ohio native and is there again. Rick's Ohio native. Randy and I, we're kind of on the outside looking in on this, but you know, I want to talk. You know, when the show is actually being broadcast is one thing, but today we happen to be at the start of Nurses Week, and we want to talk a little bit about some topics that relate to nursing, the evolution of nursing, how it all started, where it's come, and Jerry, even in your career, you know, being one of the graduates from your program back in the, let's say, the early 80s, or even in the late 70s, whichever it was. I apologize for that, but you know, male nurses were few and far between back then, and there was almost even I don't want to say a stigma, but there could have been some negative connotations attached to that, and yet here you are, you've kind of been a leader and promoting not only the profession, but how these barriers needed to go away, and all the good and your own personal experience of what drew you into nursing in the first place. I think it's a fascinating story. But with that, you know, just to share some of Jerry's background too, I was listening to Randy's podcast, and if you haven't heard Jerry's story, he was one of our first guests back in November of 2019, and he talked about a childhood illness. He was in high school, and for some reason, unknown reason, he just had medical crisis in a sense, required instant, you know, immediate hospitalization. And young kid in a ward with elderly geriatric patients, basically, and yet it was the compassion extended by a nurse who made him, you know, maybe allayed some of his fears, but was really the spark for a career. Now, looking back, Jerry, I mean, sometimes you have to say, how did I get here? And quite a long journey since days working over at Cedar Point, by the way, too.
You've done your homework.
I've actually been out there. I haven't visited it, but I know where it is. It's pretty impressive. The rickety old roller coasters, but
Sandusky.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, Jerry, I don't want to steal your thunder here, but I want to get your impressions on where nursing, how it's evolved, where do you see it going, and then later I want to get into some of an important topic that I think that is really relevant to MD coaches too, and it's the stresses that nurses endure, because I think everybody on our panel today, we recognize the importance of nursing. We love and respect nurses who we've worked with over the years and continue to do so. And yet we see them a lot of times beaten down, and the stress that goes with the profession. And so I want to, you know, these are some of the areas I want to get into today. So let's kind of get your feedback. And, you know, if I left something out, go ahead and fill in the blanks for me.
No, I'll tell you, you, like I said, have done your homework. I'm going to try to connect some dots about, you know, becoming a male in nursing, being a male in the profession. as you mentioned, growing up in a small farming community, I had no experience of the medical profession overall. I was just fascinated watching it on TV. Where it really began was my parents and grandparents became emergency medical technicians as a result of a community-based program to extend first aid really out into rural counties throughout Ohio. And as they studied for this work, I searched out their first aid books, and it had pictures and cross-section drawings. And my dad actually found me reading it one day, and he scolded me because it had pictures of things that he thought a boy my age shouldn't be looking at. But I kept finding the book. You know, I'm not stupid, and I just was enthralled by that stuff. And so then I would watch for things on TV or in the newspaper about medical care, and I just was drawn to it for some reason. And you mentioned, of course, I was hospitalized, and it truly was. It was the third night of my hospitalization. I stayed 5 nights, and what had happened was I was running up the class after lunch at high school, and almost fainted on the stairs heading to class, and had to go to the principal's office and talk to the secretary. And then, because there are no school nurses in Continental Ohio, ended up going to our family practitioner, who was about 25-minute drive away. And I remember one thing that happened during the examination. He said, well, you got to take Jerry to St. Rita's in Lima, which it was about another 40 minutes from our home. And my mom said, well, we'll go home and take him and pack up his stuff. And they didn't tell me what was going on. And he said, no, I think you need to go now. So that sounded serious. So freshman in high school, heading to St. Rita's. Next thing you know, I'm admitted, and it was a lot of tests. Basically, I was bleeding internally, and they didn't know why. So that third night, a nurse was making her rounds, and she was doing her assessment, and then she said, how you doing? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I don't know what's going on. Nobody's telling me anything. So she went back to the nurse's station, apparently, and got a big book, which was my chart, and sat on the edge of the bed and just went through what was going on, because I had tests and they were drawing blood, and she, told me about my hemoglobin level and all this stuff. And she said, you're getting better. And it was the first time anybody had said that. And so her ability to understand that I needed information that I didn't have, her willingness to spend some time and answer questions, just with a level of concern and compassion that just struck me. She walked out of the room, and every time I tell the story, her polyester uniform gets whiter. The black stripe on her cap gets blacker. And she had this glow, of course. And she said,
and a halo.
If you need anything during the night, just you push your call button, but I'll continue to check on you. And I immediately, she walked out of the room, I looked up at the ceiling to heaven, and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to do what she did for me. That story might sound familiar because as I arrived at Mount Carmel, we were working on a communications campaign with a set of commercials, and for some reason they thought that snippet was worth putting on TV. So I think people are a little tired of hearing that story now, but it is truly how that all began. And back to your question about men in nursing, I called my parents and I said, hey, I'm going to be a registered nurse. And it wasn't the reaction I expected. And to make a very long story short, I just pursued it no matter what. And a big turning point for me too was at Bowling Green State University. I was there for 1 semester. I was in my pre-nursing courses. We had to meet with the dean mid-semester or quarter to discuss our future potential of getting into the nursing program. And she said, you're not going to make it. You need to pick a different major. And I just didn't know why. And she said, well, your GPA just isn't going to cut it. And it wasn't spectacular, but I didn't think it was bad. I graduated second in my class in high school, and she said, no, you're not, you need a different major. My dad was thrilled. But I made the decision, I gotta quit. I gotta leave. And there's a very dramatic story about this, but I won't go into that. But I went home and I worked in my grandparents' grocery store and did the accounting and the books to do cash registers and payroll and all that. And I began attending classes at Ohio State branch in Lima, Ohio, trying to figure out what am I going to do. And a friend called me about a diploma program up in Toledo, St. Vincent Hospital, that she was going to go to. And she said, you might want to check it out. I didn't know those programs existed because I was going to pursue a college degree. And the one thing my dad did say is he said, well, this will be good. You can get in there and figure out that this isn't going to be something you're going to enjoy because you're right away into a clinical setting. And I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. There were 6 guys in our class, which completely freaked out the school. They'd never had that many guys in a class before. And the guy who ended up being my best man in our wedding, he had been a journeyman millwright at General Motors, threw down his wrench one day and said, I want to be a nurse.
Wow.
And so he and I used to talk a lot about stigma and what's right and wrong for men and women to do. We supported each other during the program because there were things that some of the faculty felt we should not be doing, whereas others were like, if you're going to be a nurse, you got to do this. It was just a very interesting time. And when I started, I think, Randy, you had it in your blog you most recently posted about men in nursing about that time. It was around 2.3, 2.7%.
Right.
And as of December, I just looked, as of December 2017, it's now 9.1. So it's not a lot, but it's been steadily growing over time. And what's really interesting is that while we give Florence Nightingale the crown for establishing the profession of nursing, nursing care was actually provided by men much earlier. And I want to give you guys some statistics. I think it's interesting because I once had to give a lecture on, men in nursing. What is it about that group of people? And so here's some interesting facts. The first nursing school that they can find was in India in 250 BC. And in the Sharaka, I'm not even sure how it's pronounced. This is what they describe of what these men should be. I'm going to read it off. Of good behavior, distinguished for purity, possessed of cleverness and skill, in bed with kindness, skilled in every service a patient may require, competent to cook food, skilled in bathing and washing the patient, rubbing and massaging the limbs, lifting and assisting him to walk about, well skilled in making and cleaning of beds, readying the patient, and skillful in waiting upon one that is ailing, and never unwilling to do anything that may be ordered. 250 BC.
I was just thinking 250 BC.
That's amazing because it's still nails. Those are all that's like the checklist.
The string comes through.
Well, it is, and then you link it back to then all the principles that Nightingale reinforced in the Crimean War.
In the Crimean,
that's what she was doing. So, guys, here's a couple other things. In my office here, I have a reproduction of it's a bowl that depicts Achilles bandaging the wounds of Patroclus, and it's housed in the Museum of Greek and Roman Antiquities in Berlin. It's estimated that this was in 50 BC. And Rhonda, a connection for you and I, the gentleman that you and I used to treat as a patient at the Grant Wound Care Center, framed that picture for me.
No kidding, because as you're describing it, I can see it in my mind right now.
Yeah, we found out he framed things, and he wanted to say thank you for the work that we had done. And I said, hey, I got this print. I don't know what to do with it. And maybe I'll grab it off the wall and show you all.
That's cool.
Remember the story of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10, verses 35 to 36. During that Byzantine Empire, the people paid innkeepers to provide nursing care. In There was a hospital opened by men called Paraboloni in 300 AD to care for victims of the Black Plague. In 1065, Knights Hospitallers established a hospital for Holy Land pilgrims, which eventually became the American branch of the Alexian Brothers in Elk Grove, Illinois. And so they started schools for men in nursing, Chicago, St. Louis, Pennsylvania, and Bellevue. Two patron saints from the 1300s, St. John of God and St. Camillus de Laelis, started as soldiers, then turned to nursing. St. Camillus is actually the one that started the sign of the Red Cross, still used today. 70 years before the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock, Friar Juan de Domina was shipwrecked off the Texas coast and was the first identified nurse in what was eventually to become the United States. And one more, and I'll stop. 1783, James Derman, a Black slave, worked as a nurse in New Orleans and saved money to purchase his freedom. He later studied medicine and became a respected physician in Philadelphia.
Wow.
So all of this prior to Florence.
So did Florence just have a better publicist?
Well, she certainly had a lot of money.
I have an opinion. I think Florence had a lot of money.
Yeah.
She, in fact, her dad, and this is way off the subject, was not originally Nightingale, but he was a big land baron, but he somehow was gifted with or came by another gigantic piece of property that belonged to the king of Nightingale or whatever, but he changed his name.
She was similar to Louisa May Alcott in the 1850s and 60s. She came from Boston wealth,
right,
and then was in the Civil War down Fredericksburg or wherever. Hey, can I ask a question, Jerry?
You can.
So, in this transition, like you're talking about, that we're all talking about, what about today? The change from the diplomat to everybody having to have a BSN to be a, so how has that changed? Are there any diplomat schools left, or does everybody have to get a BSN? How does that work?
No, it's interesting you bring that up. I was actually going to talk about that in terms of the future of nursing as well. So most diploma programs, I'm not aware of any in the United States at the present time. So two ways to become a nurse right now, either through licensed practical nursing, of course. There's also the associate degree in nursing and the baccalaureate. So but the two ways to become an RN is either through associate degree or baccalaureate, and that permits you to set for your licensure exam in the state to practice nursing. And then of course there's advanced practice and advanced degrees. So most schools of nursing that had the diploma degree are long gone. I don't know if that's a good thing, but it's certainly, and that's how Mount Carmel actually started, was a diploma program. Grant Hospital had a diploma program, Riverside. So they were very popular, and it was really a way to staff the facility because the students would pretty much provide a lot of the care, particularly on off shifts and weekends.
Well, the reason I was asking that too is I had, and most of these young ladies were, let's say 40-ish, but they have families. One girl in particular was divorced, had the 2 kids and all that. And then the hospital system was, and she was a brilliant nurse, was saying, well, you have to have a BSN, to be, the hospital system wants to be whatever that is, the centers of excellence, you'll tell us. But anyways, so she was going back and having to try to do it online. She got it. And it just recently, it took her a couple of years of doing it, but she had to go back and take undergraduate courses. And I thought it was and she got no credit for her experience. So I thought that was, I thought that seemed a little difficult for them to come and say, your pay scale and everything is affected by the fact you don't have a BSN.
I was seeing that probably back in the 1990s, maybe up in the Northeast, where I was originally from, Jerry. They were phasing out LPNs. It was like a concerted effort just to do away with the whole concept. And it's like, why? This makes no sense. There's a real need for that area of nursing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked in large health systems most of my career. What you're describing is exactly what they promote, right? A college degree. If you don't have a bachelor's, you need to get it. phased out LPNs, but I can tell you times are changing. Here at Mount Carmel, we actually have LPNs that work in our emergency departments and our freestanding EDs. They do extraordinarily well. We also have a pilot going on at Mount Carmel East. We have 2 units that are, we've re-engaged LPNs into the care model, and we're going to track our outcomes and promote it. There is some concern from our corporate office that that's a direction we should be thoughtful about, and we are. But we think it's there's a reason to have it. And in addition, we're not forcing it, but why wouldn't an LPN find great work in a health system and then find opportunities to extend their education if and should they want to? And we have the Mount Carmel College of Nursing to assist in that process, plus a great tuition benefit. So I see it as a great win-win all the way around.
It sounds like a good,
Jerry, do you think if a hospital system's desire to go towards magnet status actually affected that?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit.
The magnet standards have actually changed. So originally, when the Institute of Medicine reports came out early on, baccalaureate education was exactly what they promoted. And so the American Nurses Credentialing Center set up an expectation by 2020, 80% of nurses across the country would have a baccalaureate degree in nursing. So hospitals that wanted to pursue this designation set a goal and then attempted to achieve an 80% BSN of their nursing staff during their application and then designation process. It's interesting. I just came from Medical University of South Carolina. We were redesignated magnet for the second time. But in our transition from the original set of standards to the ones that we had to promote, you didn't have to achieve 80% BSN during your application process. You had to set a goal and then meet your goal. So we had to set our original goal based on the old standards. So we did get to 81.2% BSN by the time they were there. But once we were redesignated for the second time, we decided to say, now we're going to be realistic and say what really is what we want to promote, because there were a lot of nurses in rural South Carolina that we would have loved to employ, but it was hard. And so we're going to reset our expectations. And it's not to say that we don't value education, but it's just to say we need all hands on deck, and we need folks to provide excellent care. And a degree isn't always the way to identify that that's how that gets done.
Yeah.
Jerry, you pointed out something that I don't think I'm imagining this, but the very existence of the baccalaureate nurse, particularly in recent years, has created a situation where the nursing profession sort of cannibalizes its own. They don't want to do bedside nursing for the rest of their lives. That used to be the goal. Now the goal is to be a PhD and run a hospital system, right?
Absolutely.
So there's got to be some way to fill that gap.
Right. And one of the things that I am focused on here at Mount Carmel is that to reimagine the expectation that as you get more education, you get further away from frontline patient care. So I have established a great collaborative relationship with Dr. Kathy Williamson, who's the dean. And we are very committed to discern what's the right way to just really exploit the talents of a well-educated nursing workforce, but more at the bedside. And when I say bedside, I also mean in a clinic, in a procedure room,
Sure.
an operating suite. It's wherever the patient and nurse meet. And so I'm hopeful that over the next 3 to 5 years, we really sort of turn this on its head.
And good for you guys. I'm glad somebody's thinking about that.
Yeah, well, and it's just, why wouldn't we? But the assumption in many nurses' heads is, well, now that I have a DMP or a master's degree, I don't take care of patients anymore. I'm like, oh my gosh, if you could just take care of patients, that's not a just. It's just, can you imagine what we might see in terms of outcomes and change in healthcare if folks with that lens were providing day-to-day patient care and then had time to then use their advanced education and experience to then help us transform the care delivery model. I think it's a win-win. So we've got to figure that out. And I think we're going to create some new ground here in doing so. But it's so funny. And I was committed to it when a dean of another college of nursing, who will go unnamed, said that we actually teach in our undergraduate program, just work a couple years in the hospital and then get out.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm taking you on, because that's not the care I want to get when I'm hospitalized. Get out. It's not appropriate.
I worked with some wonderful LPNs over the years. So Jerry, my background too, when I was in high school and then through college, I worked as an orderly, worked night shift, worked day, and this is up in northern New Jersey. And when I tell you, some of the LPNs were fantastic. And I wish some of them would have just had the opportunity to be recognized and maybe having somebody encourage them or support them to go on and further their academic aspect of their career, because they were invaluable. And that it really, it saddens me to hear that, what you're describing, that attitude of, hey, all I need to do is get my degree and then I'm out of here. It's like, no, you're right. There's got to be some incentive to stay in the trenches, but to be more competent, to be more educated in critical thinking and that type of thing too, and better understanding. It makes you better practitioner ultimately. So yeah, I've seen that too. This phenomenon of wanting to just get the master's and then get the nurse practitioner or DNP now too, and then just be done with it. It's like, but why did you get into nursing in the first place?
I'm going to offer an opinion on that, and always the troublemaker. Mm-hmm. I think a good solution would be to make the pay scale of bedside nursing commensurate with its value. These are the human beings that make a hospital, and for the amount that some CEOs, not all, put in their pockets annually, you could employ a dozen nurses.
Randy, you know what? Patient satisfaction seems to be a big thing in hospitals too. They're constantly, how are we doing? It's like it's almost like they took the Disney model and tried to apply it into medicine. And yet, you know what? You just touched on something. I was so ticked off several years back during one of our hospital general staff meetings when they brought somebody in from corporate, and not once did they talk about patient care. But what really got me was that in the prior week, 2 of my patients had been in-house, and they said that nobody ever offered them a wash basin the whole time they were there. To me, again, going back to my orderly days where we would do PM care, we give back rubs and freshen the sheets and just always make sure the patients were comfortable. When you got so many RNs or BSNs, I don't know if that they feel that it's beneath them, or they feel that they don't need as much manpower, so they put more work on the staff.
Well, frankly, my impression is that they've cut the numbers.
Yeah. So the most important part of it all is the
nurse to patient ratio has significantly changed.
Yes.
Over the course of my career. The RNs don't have time to be nurses.
Exactly. They're administrators. They're doing administrative stuff. Mm-hmm. They're doing their meds, and that's like their focus is just passing meds the whole night, making sure that IVs are hung and that type of stuff. But where are the staff who are making the patients comfortable and making sure that they don't do things like develop a pressure ulcer, even as an example. It's penny wise, pound foolish.
Well, one, it makes me feel really good to hear my colleagues here talking about PM care. that was where I started my nursing career, and that was a thing. You know, on my first shift was 3 to 11 shift, and we provided PM care. And I was just watching a conversation happen in a Facebook group. It's a nursing Facebook group that I belong to, where they were talking about the value and really how much nursing was done in the simple act of giving a back rub or to massage the limbs. The more that you got to know your patient from a socioeconomic status, they tend to open up and talk to you about the things that are affecting them, both mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Not only that, but you get to see more so about their anatomy and what, you know, how they move their body, if they can move their body. There's a lot more to that than just, it's a back rub.
No, exactly. You're doing an assessment that whole time.
It's an assessment the entire time. And there's a part of me that is, I'm sad that that does not happen anymore. It really doesn't, because I think for a couple of reasons. One, I think with the advancement of science and just what we do in acute care and how fast-paced that is, and just how acutely ill people are when they are in the hospital, it requires more of that nurse's time to direct their thoughts and their efforts towards making sure that the information is taken care of and the patient's actually safe and not in danger. That those other things that were also valuable fell to the wayside. That's not as higher up on the list at the moment.
Pick one medical issue. So when I started in nursing in orthopedics at Ohio State 100 years ago, the total joint patient, hip, stayed 10 to 14 days.
I remember those days.
All right. Yep.
How long are they in the hospital today?
Oh my gosh, my mother's she was out in 3 days.
3 days.
I
was going to say 3 days probably.
Well, we're sending hips home.
Outpatient?
To Albany Surgical Hospital within 12 hours of going into the operating room.
Yeah.
Now, so, and they're doing great because science and technology of what Rhonda is describing, that's all happened. But think of what's changed in terms of healthcare when we all started and where it is today. So now we have to think creatively about how do we reinfuse the patient-nurse relationship and the opportunity to show that care and compassion in ways that we have to do today, because that's how now we're reimbursed. It's a very different time. Laminectomies, 7 days. There's no laminectomy in the hospital.
No.
So there were 6 days in a row where you could provide a back rub to the same patient. It was pretty cool, called primary nursing, and they got to know you. And it's a different day.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. You know, as the conversation was progressing, though, I couldn't help but think, you know, we talked a little bit about nurturing those that are at what I'll call the beginning spot, or that, you know, as you progress through the advanced education continuum there. We've talked about the LPNs, you know, and maybe as the nursing assistants, they start in the nursing students. Well, I'm going to go to the other end where you've got advanced degrees. We talked a little bit about the DNP, and one of the most hotly debated situations right now in healthcare, or at least what I've been seeing, is the advanced practice nurses and physician assistants looking to be independent in their practice and wanting to be doctors, even though they may have that designation. There's not really creating the defining line of I'm a medical doctor versus I'm a doctor of nursing practice. So we've had guests on our show that have expressed concern. They've written books about this concern. And so I want to give fair airtime to the other side, if you will. And I'm not saying that I'm drawing lines here, but I am curious, you know, what have you seen of that? What are your thoughts on that? You know, being a nursing leader, I'm very curious what your thoughts are.
Well, as you can imagine, I have a lot of opinion about this. So what's really interesting is when you work in a health system, you get to know a pattern of care that's just accepted by a particular environment. So most of my experience has always been in sort of a large health system or like an academic medical center. So there are residents and medical students, and that creates a different kind of an environment for somebody who is an advanced practice provider, like a nurse or a physician's assistant. However, I moved for 3.5 years to Medical University of South Carolina, and it was one of the most restrictive nurse practice states in the country. So things that I knew nurses could do in Ohio in an advanced practice role, they could not do in South Carolina. What was interesting is that there was individuals from both the College of Nursing at MUSC and the health system that collaborated and worked very hard to change the legislation to allow nurses to practice up to the top of their license in the state. And some of that was around prescribing authority, pronouncing death. Another one was supervision. So it allowed nurses to have, they could do more with less physician presence, in a geographic location. And it took a lot of time. I mean, they were at this for years, but they got the legislation passed. So within that experience, what I watched happen was the same thing that you were describing, Rhonda, and there's a lot at play. One of them is that some advanced practice nurses don't want to be known as a nurse anymore and like to be called doctor. Mm-hmm. Yet for the rural South Carolinian, a doctor means one thing, right, and that's not what you are. So how we title people and what we call them, that gets mucky. I also have to say that when I changed the organizational structure at MUSC and had advanced practice nurses report to the chief nurse, that caused a fury because they didn't want to be associated with me.
I bet it did.
Well, I'm like, but you're an RN. Yeah. And ultimately, I'm accountable for your practice.
That's right.
Whether I like it or not. So you're going to report to me. So it's just interesting ways in which we perceive things. And I will tell you, when I will give you one example of when I got an aha moment about an advanced practice nurse. MUSC in South Carolina has a very extensive telehealth program. They're one of 2 federally funded telehealth programs in the US. And I had never seen telehealth really in like we have seen it lately. So I wanted to go visit the area, and of course it's just all a bunch of monitors and cameras, and that was one thing. But they said, you really ought to go watch Kelly Garber. I said, okay, who's Kelly Garber? Well, she's a nurse practitioner, and she does telehealth in the schools. Okay. So I go to Kelly's office. She's right across from the street from the health in an old Victorian, or I don't even know what you would call it down in Charleston, one of those historic homes, right?
Yeah.
And she's sitting at her desk, and she dials in to see a student in a school. And it's a county like 2.5 hours away from Charleston. So she's able to, on her monitor, with an assistant at the school, look in the kid's ear, which was better than being there in person. She could hear his heart. They did a little cardiovascular check. She looked in his mouth and made a diagnosis of an infection. She, because the parent had already signed an agreement, as she was ending her note, the prescription gets delivered to the pharmacy so that the parent on the way home from work, who never had to leave work, picks up the prescription. It took less than 11 minutes. And I just sat there and thought, wow, why can't we do this a lot? Yeah. Now, the first thing when I tell people the story is, well, you're taking work away from physicians. I said, well, let's think about that. Mm-hmm. Why can't a nurse practitioner do that? So you can do what you can do best, which is really dig in to these chronic cases. And you know what a physician said? Well, I make a lot of money on this cheap stuff.
Shame.
I have all these crazy experiences, but what I see is potential.
Yeah.
And if we can figure out ways in which providers can understand their lines of authority but just maximize people's work, we could do some pretty extraordinary things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about efficiencies, the results, the cost would go down.
Listen, I think one of the silver linings of COVID has been the emergence or the moving telemedicine to the front of the line, because we've had platforms, but now people are recognizing how, what you just alluded to, Jerry, it's efficient. You're able to triage in a sense, and especially when you're in rural areas too. And it's not just limited to rural areas where, I told the story before. I was at a meeting of nurses out in the South Dakota a number of years ago, and it was a regional meeting. And a nurse told me how she would drive 6 hours to see one patient up in Montana. And it's like, good Lord, if you had telemedicine, that would be a solution. But also for our wound care patients, it's so difficult for them to get to the wound center all the time too. So we're actually implementing it I'm working with a company. I'm serving as chief medical officer for a company that we are in our clinical trials, and we're implementing telemedicine into our trials. And so we think it's going to be an important way to go, and we're going to see better results too.
Think how you could use it.
Anyway, not to get off on that tangent.
I was going to say, think how you can use this for mental health in the schools.
Right.
I mean, there's an explosion of adolescent and middle school, especially since this explosion of depression, anxiety, and all this. And telemedicine to me offers, and when you have a lady like you were just talking about, and she could sit here face to face and talk with the student, and parent could be there, whatever. I think that would be a wonderful use of the technology to me. But
well, that's coaching right there too. I mean, in a sense, there you go. And Jerry, going back to your original story, a couple of things that really struck me about your encounter with that nurse, and what we're talking about here is communication. So much of what we do, and whether to do a good job, good communication is always behind it, versus when outcomes are not so optimal. A lot of times there's been a breakdown in communication. But the other thing that struck me too, just so I don't forget this and having a senior moment, she was also a leader in her own right. And I say that because to me, one of the leadership characteristics that, you've heard this cliche, it's doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And that's exactly what she did. And that's what leaders do. And so I just wanted to get that in there before, like I said, I forgot.
Got it.
It's a great story. I love that story. It's powerful. There's powerful images in there, and we can relate to that.
Well, the nugget that came out of it for me, I think what I heard from you, Jerry, is we can all, if we're all in our lane and we're maximizing to our strengths and abilities and place our work in the areas where we're greatest and highest need that match the skills, there's a place for everybody in this mosaic. That's what I'm hearing from you. It's not a preference for one or another, or one has to displace another. There's a spot, but we got to define the spots.
Well, it sounds also like the focus of what you folks what you've been talking about, Des or Rhonda, the primary care nurse at the bedside, that is now at the bedside of the PACU or the intensive care unit nurse, I guess. Those are the only ones that are doing it for days on end, relating to the family, doing the care, talking to the patient who's intubated. I guess that's the place where that's still done.
Well, I tell you, back to your point, Dr. Zollinger, I mean, this past year, nurses were there when people died. Yeah. No family. And for me, as hard as that is to hear, there were families that sent acknowledgement to nursing staff, because I was comforted knowing you were there. That for me, there's been that candle's burning a little brighter right now. I think there's been an acknowledgement that caring presence is one of value. And if you give the individual the time to do that, it has the impact that we would all want for anyone that we care for or love ourselves. So I think we have a hopeful future if we can use what we've learned this past year, not only the pandemic, but social injustice and unrest, the attack on the Capitol, the economic crisis that affected so many families. I mean, if you think about what nurses went through this past year with spouses and children, and it's an exposure every day to something we didn't quite know exactly what was going on, and then to confront communities that don't believe it, don't understand it, question your authority. It's really an incredible year. And so I hope, and what I'm working with our teams to consider is that let's quit thinking about this as the virus and consider it the enzyme that changes how we do what we do, and we never go back to the way it was. Because if that was working, this clearly showed not so much. And so we want to really do things differently. And so we're working here at Mount Carmel to transition folks to acknowledge our what we've been through and try to heal from it and realize that it's not going away. And then acknowledge that now some of our leaders call it pivot. Others say, transition, whatever word you want to use, but we've got to now start to point towards the future. And it's not to go back, it's to go full steam ahead.
I like that. Say pivot. Don't ever say paradigm shift. I put that one in the back burner forever. If I ever hear anybody say that at a meeting, I'm going to shoot them.
Well, mine is
the pivoting is good.
Think outside the box. I hate
So Jerry, we all acknowledge that nursing is just an inherently extremely stressful profession. And we talk about burnout on the physician end, but what's happened this past year, everything that you just described, it's almost like that stress level was probably amplified times 100 at least. Have you seen, personal experience wise, or have you been privy to any kind of statistics or information about, has there been increased burnout in nursing as a result of all this? I mean, what have you seen, or what can you tell us?
Yeah, there's actually a study that was just published about 2 weeks ago. It was actually authored by Bern Melnick at the Ohio State University and faculty looking at nurse burnout in critical care units. It's pretty distressing. So absolutely, it is there, and it's been painful to watch. There's also some podcasts and documentaries out where nurses have just said, "I'm done," and they're done at the bedside, but now they're doing other roles like case management and things from working from home. But what's compelling is that from the outside, you think, well, thank goodness they're still in the profession. We're using their expertise in a different way. But when you watch them talk about what they miss, they really got into nursing to take care of people.
Right.
And because of what this pandemic, the stress has caused, they just can't do it right now. So I think we have to acknowledge that it has been an onslaught. And I will tell you that over the last 13 months of me being here, those are the things that kept me up at night, still do.
Do you see us losing more nurses in the profession? And as a result, are we going to be able to replenish, get applicants to nursing programs, and, how do we encourage them, I guess, and to look past all these, really terrible things that have been going on and stay optimistic through all this?
I will tell you, the things that we employed here at Mount Carmel were not our idea. but I noticed a pattern when the community acknowledged the nursing staff, it infused hope. People breathed a little more. And so initially there was a tremendous amount of community acknowledgement, clap-ins and churches driving by and posters and applauding nurses. I mean, there was a lot of really good stuff happening. Then all of a sudden, because it wasn't going away, people just sort of retreated. And the numbers are climbing, right? Mm-hmm. And I tell you, when we hit over 214 patients last December, I was scared because it's the holidays. People were exhausted. Mm-hmm. They have been doing this for over almost 7-8 months. It's getting worse, and it's that time of year when you want to enjoy family and friends, and now you're not. I was very concerned. That was our highest time of turnover here at Mount Carmel. So December, January, and February, it was extraordinarily high. So to your question, did we lose people? We did. And some actually signed up to do some pretty lucrative traveling contracts because the money was there to achieve. And there were nurses that said, love Mount Carmel, but this for my family right now and my husband without a job, I got to do it. So they would go across the street and work for a 13-week contract, stay on here as casual, but make a lot of money. But they did it not out of spite, or it was necessary.
Mm-hmm. Survival.
So this ties in some interesting comments we've had about pay, recognition, burnout. And so what I hope we can do in nursing is, the good news is that applicants are high. So that's good. I think there was some aura around the pandemic that caused people to rethink about nursing, because of those were really, really some solid people during a really tough time. So we just have to make sure that we create work environments where, as we employ nurses, we got to work very hard to retain them, and also continue to bring them into the organization and stay.
It's an interesting comment you made, Jerry. I was thinking, as through my white hairs, we talked about that, was as we talked about the computer, and we talked about Zoom fatigue, and we talk about telemedicine, isolation and human contact. Isolation was awful for all of us. You just wanted to be outside. You just wanted to touch somebody, and that's all. To me, that's the primary thing of nursing from the get-go, is that it's human contact, So I hope this evolves, because I'm glad to hear that the number of applicants is up, because I don't know about what medical and dental school, how that's going for those folks. Because MDs now, I'm hearing these kids say, well, they want to use it like an MBA or a JD and go practice, whatever. So I'm glad to hear nursing's up, but I'm glad to hear the human contact part's coming back. And you can't blame the nurses for doing the itinerant kind of care, because they can treat their own mental staff that way.
Yeah, I think the challenge is still going to be too, is to retain these young minds and people who have been drawn to nursing. Don't discourage them. Once they're there, keep building them up. Keep acknowledging them. Everybody just needs a little pat on the back once in a while too, just to know that they're not alone, or that they're not facing all this stuff by themselves.
And each one of you and all of our physician friends can play a significant role by just looking a nurse in the eye and saying, thanks for bringing that to my attention. And the one thing my wife taught me early on in our marriage was, she saw some communication that I had sent out to some staff, and it said, thank you for all you do. And she said, don't use that phrase anymore. Thank you for all you do. She says, first of all, you have no idea what they've done. And she says, that's kind of like you telling me, thanks for being a good wife. She goes, because you have no idea what I do to support you. Right? So I completely don't use that phrase. But I'm reminded when I want to say it, that I have to acknowledge that what that nurse has done with and for patients and their families is extraordinary. And if you can get them to talk about it just a bit, it'll blow your mind. And I'll tell you a very specific story about that. So I'm a guy in a suit. I'm the chief nurse. I show up for some event at some nursing station, and we're applauding some achievement. How many days have we gone without a central line associated bloodstream infection? And I'm watching the celebration, and I see a nurse over by a room, and she's sitting there, and I'm getting the look. And I've seen this look before a lot. And it's like, how soon before you leave? So I am drawn to things like that. So the celebration is over and everybody's mingling and patting themselves on the back for CLABSI-free time. And then I walk right over to this nurse. And of course, she goes immediately to her computer. Now she's at the bedside, but she's at the computer. She was taking care of a very young patient. And I said, hey, you caught my eye during the presentation. I said, my name's Jerry Mansfield. I'm the chief nurse exec here. And she introduced herself, and we had started to have a conversation. And I said, tell me about your patient. And so she started to explain the patient, and then she started to talk about the family, and then she started, and I just was moved. So obviously, if I got the glare away, what she was doing on behalf of this child was extraordinary. There was no way I could have gone in and done what she was doing because of all the equipment and all the supply. Just incredible. And here's the kicker. So now we're having eye contact, and I am like, first of all, I just said, I can't thank you enough for this. And I said, who else should I recognize for this child's care that you've been providing? And she named a physician. And my heart leapt in my chest because he and I were not on the same page about a lot in the organization. So I thought, well, she asked me to acknowledge him, so I'm gonna have to follow through. I go to a holiday event at this physician's home, and he literally, wherever I was in the room, he was exactly opposite. So he describes but I had a mission. I had to talk to him about this patient and nurse. So I finally got tired of jockeying the room, and I zeroed in on him, and I said, hey, Kevin, I want to first thank you for this event in your home, and what a beautiful home it was, of course, and a wonderful evening. I said, but there's something I need to tell you. And he's like, well, yeah. And so I told him about the nurse and the patient. His shoulders dropped. He got tears in his eyes. He said, well, that means a lot to me. I said, I just want you to know that nurse thinks you're like about the best thing since sliced bread. Mm-hmm. And she wanted me to make sure you knew that. And from that moment on, now we at least are cordial to one another.
Start.
Dr. Dess, it goes back to what you were saying. It's about communication and it's about relationships. And if we in healthcare can work together as compatriots mm-hmm. in all the things that confront our citizens and the health needs of our nation, we could do so much more than the arguing that we sometimes get caught up in. So those are the things that keep me getting out of bed in the morning and coming back mm-hmm. to work, is the opportunity to hopefully help that happen. And then, because again, we will be in that bed, and we will look up into the eyes of those people Amen. Looking down on us. And I will have hoped at that time, I don't have regrets.
Well, I can.
There are definitely more. Oh, sorry, Ron.
Well, I was just going to comment that Jane, his wife, is a very, very wise woman. And Jerry, even more so a wise man because he listened to his wife. And I am one of the recipients of that very specific feedback, the thank yous. You probably saw me, I reached over to the bulletin board. This card right here has followed me at every one of my bulletin boards and every management position that I have ever held. And it is dated 5/6/1993. And it is from Mr. Jerry Mansfield. And if I can do it without crying, I will read to you very quickly. It won't take long. But he stated at that time, Rhonda, people enter careers, professions for a lot of different reasons. Money, power, stability, potential, fame, fun. You are one of those individuals, I believe, who are called. I daily witness your contributions, not only to patients and families by showing patience, competence, care, but also to your peers by showing commitment and professionalism. To me, you've shown stamina, persistence, and that squeaky wheels have a better chance of getting greased than those which don't. Thank you for being a nurse. Respectfully, Jerry. This meant a lot to me, obviously. And so do you. And it's why you have always been my mentor.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Well, that was certainly not. Thank you for all you do.
That's pretty strong right there.
That's from the heart too. And that's what we need more of. Not to get on the soapbox too much, but that's, I think the difference between being great at what you do in the medical professions, because it's not just limited to physicians or nurses even. It's doing it for the right reasons, and it is a calling, and we are social creatures, and we need each other. And Jerry, I love too when you did on Randy's podcast, you were talking about the Doris Kearns Goodwin's book. She wrote about Lincoln and his cabinet of adversaries, really, and that's powerful too. Your little story that you just told about the doc, you guys were not necessarily adversarial, but it was less than cordial, and you broke down the barriers just through some really the kindness and the advocacy, performed by a nurse, and you took it upon yourself not to just run away from it. You went towards it, and that's what the great ones do.
Well, so I think we're all blessed with people in our lives that touch us, and I learned as much from people at an amusement park in Sandusky, Ohio. Folks at the grocery store my parents and grandparents used to own and run in rural Northwest Ohio. Lessons about how you treat a customer. Lessons my grandma taught me about cleaning. Always with a sense of humor. Mentors in nursing across the board, and physician leaders who have been just some wonderful colleagues of support. So, we're honored and humbled by all the people that come in and out of our lives and affect us. And it's just nice to still be connected and to be reminded that what I considered the right thing to do, that you have carried this all that time, Rhonda, means a great deal.
Same here.
That's pretty strong.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know how you top that one, Rhonda.
I can't, because I'm going to cry.
Well, you got all of us about, I'm over here.
Well, it's heartfelt. It's heartfelt, and I think we're all in this profession because it means a lot to us. It's more than a job. Yeah. It's a calling, as Jerry stated. Yeah. It is for all of us.
Yes. That's why we all have loved the journey too, I would say. And our journeys have all been quite different, but yet I think there's a lot of common ground there. And
we care about it.
What motivates us too. We never worked by the clock. We never just, we just did what needed to be done. always.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful to hear that, you know, even back then, Jerry, you're recognizing Rhonda for what she was doing and the way you went about it. And so no small act or no, you know, something like that, it may seem insignificant, or you just did it and then it was gone, like from your mind. Other things were probably being thrown at you.
Oh, make no mistake.
The impact.
Make no mistake. I was not an angel. Believe you me, I gave him a lot of grief too.
Big surprise there.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, how does that surprise us? Are you kidding me?
That line about squeaky wheels, that's an inside discussion Jerry and I've had many times. Yeah, it was intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was intentional. And that was him trying to round a wild horse is what he was trying to do. And he did.
Yeah, you start to go back and remember all those people that you, from the time you were young to whatever drove you to the profession. That got me thinking about a lady that was Sister Joanne Marie.
Oh.
Any good nun stories?
Yeah, she was a good nun.
Yeah, I have a few.
I think we all do.
Sorry.
We could talk for, that's what's interesting too. So we could talk for days about the nuns and health, right?
Oh, yeah.
And for me, coming back here and the Sisters of the Holy Cross that had started this organization hundreds of years ago, it really, really is a reminder of the legacy of caring that the religious orders across the world, of what they have done. Yeah. And boy, it's like coming home in a way.
Yeah.
So it's well,
you know, Jerry, they were interesting because I grew up there, and I live in Charlotte, and I practiced in the Catholic healthcare system, and the nuns were the ones who came and delivered the in-house, what am I trying to say? Blank on the word, but, you know, at 3 a.m. when a patient died on the table, they came and ministered to you, physician, as much as the patient's family. And like I said, I'm a Presbyterian. I'm all for the nuns. I'm just telling you, great people.
Yeah.
Great people.
Well, this has been really fun.
It always is. And, you know, trying to be respectful for Jerry's time. I just want, you know, looking at our time right now too, I want to go around the horn and give everybody one last chance to throw in your 2 cents, ask Jerry a question, make a comment, whatever it is. So Rhonda, again, we'll give it to you.
It's more so a statement, I think. I'm proud to be a nurse. That's probably the first thing, for everything we've talked about and what will be. It's been impressive in my career to see where I started and what nursing was at that point and where it's progressed to where it is today. And just seeing the change in collaborative spirit. I mean, there's always been that spirit between nurses and physicians, but it's even more so as technology becomes much more a part of the care that we give. It's even more so necessary for those two to really be in step with each other for the care of the patient. And so I'm excited to see where that goes as we move forward. I think we've got some really cool things ahead of us. And I want to say thank you. You know, I remember the first time I met Jerry, they were making, literally laying carpet on a orthopedic floor. I came to Columbus as a newlywed. I'd been here, I think, all of 3 days, did an interview, and it was with Jerry Mansfield. And he asked me a very specific question. What do you want to do in 5 years? And I said, I want your job. And he hired me anyway. So it's been a long while since I've got to see that face that I just really enjoy, and to sit and talk with him. I've been after him for over a year now. He's been in Columbus to sit and talk, but at least we got to do it today. And thank you for not only the time of support and coaching and mentoring that you provided when we were elbow to elbow, but for the many years that you didn't realize it was going on. You were still there with me.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Randy?
Well, I want to begin, of course, by thanking Jerry for being here and doing what Jerry does and has done so well for so many years. And I want to take an opportunity to remind people of my story of being absolutely certain that it was because of nurses that I was able to become a physician. If anybody wants to go back and listen to the inaugural episode of my podcast, you'll remember that I confessed that on my first medical school application, I got rejected. And those guys on the admissions committee were clearly wiser than I thought, because nothing really changed between that application and my next application, nothing significant anyway, except that I had worked in an intensive care unit at University Hospital in Birmingham as an orderly. Mm-hmm. I spent a year learning from nurses. So I guess what I'm saying is that it took a bunch of nurses to get me to a point where I was qualified to go to medical school. And I am so grateful for that. Pardon me. In my practice life, I can't think of many days that I didn't take advantage of something that I learned during that experience, and it was the nurses. So thank you, nurses, here in this Nurse Week broadcast. And Jerry, thank you for being one of the best and for being with us.
Well stated, Randy. Well stated. Dr. Z, you're up next, my friend.
I want to say, Jerry, thanks for being here. It was awesome. Glad to see you're back in the Buckeye State. I would say this to you now that you're living in Columbus. You have to carry one of these in your pocket.
Bet.
I carry one in my pocket every day of my life for good luck. I call myself a tarbucca heel. So it worked. Whichever one's, I could be a tarbuck or a buck a heel, depending on which team's better. So, but anyways, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It makes me feel great about nursing, and I commend you for the job you're doing, and proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful, Rick. And Dr. Jerry, I'll leave the next word to you, and then I'll wrap it all up. So thank you again.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, truly. And I'm going to leave 3 messages with you all and the listeners to think about. There's some significant reports that have either been approved and or are coming out that really are things to watch in terms of the evolution of nursing into the future. The first is I was honored to be one practice member on the board of the American Association of Colleges of Nursing. And just last month, they approved the new AACN Essentials for Nursing Education for the United States. It is an intent to really create the future education trajectory for nurses, both entry into practice as well as advanced practice. It's a phenomenal transition for nursing education for the U.S. Broadly. It'll take about 3 years to really get the universities and the colleges and the schools aligned with those new essentials. But it was really forward thinking about diversity and equity and inclusion and information technology and what is the role of the nurse in all of that. And so that's something exciting that has happened, and it's taken us a long time to get there. I'm looking forward to the future in relation to that. The second is the IOM report. There was one done a while ago called The Future of Nursing. There were some predictions at that time based on what nursing should or should not be spending time on. It was all around 2020 in terms of that future trajectory. The most recent report is going to be released, I think, next week. And I'm really anxious to see it because I think it's going to be a lot different. The third was just published yesterday. It's called Transforming Together, Implications and Opportunities from COVID-19 Pandemic for Nursing Education, Practice, and Regulation. And what's important about this is for the first time, nursing leadership groups are now coming together in a combined position statement. So AACN, ANA, AONL, NCSBN, National League for Nursing, they're all in. So that's a big step forward. And then finally, return to caring. I really, really think that you're going to see a re-acknowledgement of the role of the nurse providing compassionate care, that should be valued and supported. And so I look for a resurgence of that, and that'll be important for our future. So thanks for letting me share all of this and the opportunity to see all of you. Rhonda, thanks for your patience in waiting for me to be available to do this.
Always.
But I kind of needed some time to get my head wrapped around what we've been to be in the right spot to be able to do it. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jerry, we've been honored to have you in the lounge today. So it wasn't that bad.
Not at all.
It was a lot of fun today. You know, we had a little history lesson. We had some real stories that were powerful. And we got a chance to enjoy each other's company too, because as we touched on today, we're social creatures. We need to be with each other, and that's how we lift each other up too. But we hope you've enjoyed today's program. It's certainly just going back in my mind too, thinking the impact nurses have had on my career from the time I was a 14-year-old kid working as a volunteer, teaching me how to miter corners while making a bed and among other things. But to Randy's point too, you know, thinking back, nurses were always there throughout my career, whether it was those days as an orderly coming up through high school and college, then on in school, even into training then too, in the OR and such. You know, the impact, the importance of nursing is just, it can never be fully compensated or appreciated the way it should be. So thank you to all the nurses out there. We love you. We owe certainly debts of gratitude. And like Jerry said, one day we may be on that bed and we'll look to you. And so thank you. So with that, hope again you've enjoyed today's visit inside the Doctor's Lounge. For my hosts, Rhonda Crow, Randy Cook, Dr. Rick Zollander. By the way, it's Dr. Randy Cook, Dr. Rick Zollander, and our special guest, Jerry Mansfield, Dr. Jerry Mansfield. I'm your host, Dr. Desmond Bell. Till next time, remember, we see you, we believe in you, and we're here for you. Take care.
Bye.
The Doctor's Lounge isn't just only for doctors. Everyone's welcome inside the lounge. And today we had a special guest, Dr. Jerry Mansfield. Jerry's a PhD in public health, but most importantly, his career started out as a nurse, and he is truly one of the giants and leaders in the field of nursing. Our conversation today touched on areas of, including the history of nursing and the stresses of the profession. One thing, though, that is in common amongst our colleagues, Randy, Rick, and Rhonda, and me, we have the utmost respect and love for nurses. And it is Nurses Week, so we just wanted to put that out there as well. We hope you enjoyed today's program. Remember, please check out Randy's outstanding podcast, RX for Success. Jerry was one of his guests back in season 1, so check out November 9th, I believe, of 2019. Also continue to check out Rick's Pickin' and Puttin' podcast, and also Rhonda's beautiful work with MD Coaches. She is the heart and soul of our organization. And until next time, I'm your host, Dr. Desmond Bell. Remember, we see you, we believe in you, and we're here for you. Take care. See you in the lounge next time.